Gary was sitting in the dentist's chair, expecting a quick, routine appointment. He'd taken the afternoon off from his job as a project manager at a construction company, imagining it would be just another dull errand. But when the dentist finally entered the room, Gary was taken by surprise. Dr. Megan Reed, a young redhead with a warm smile and a calm demeanor, greeted him as she adjusted her gloves. "Mr. Bennett, you can relax for a moment," she said, noticing his tense posture. "I haven't even started yet." Gary managed a smile, feeling a bit self-conscious as he realized he'd been gaping at her. Her gentle humor instantly put him at ease, and by the end of his appointment, he found himself hoping he'd see her again outside the clinic. Megan, professional as always, treated him like any other patient, but there was a subtle spark he felt between them that he couldn't ignore. Soon enough, Gary found a way to make his interest known, and to his delight, Megan was receptive. They began dating, discovering they shared common values, a strong work ethic, and a desire to build a life together. Megan's compassion and dedication to her patients matched Gary's drive in his work, and he admired her independence and sense of humor. A few years into their relationship, they got married and moved into a small rental apartment while saving for a home. Their life was comfortable and simple, and when their son, Jake, was born, Megan decided to take time off work to focus on raising him. Gary was now the sole provider, and though finances were tight, they were managing well enough. One day, Megan's parents visited with news that changed everything. They had sold their country home and, with the proceeds, wanted to help Gary and Megan buy a home of their own. It was a generous offer, but with one condition: the new home would need to be in Megan's parents' names for legal security. When Gary came home from work that night, Megan was excited to share the news. "Gary, you won't believe it, my parents are giving us the money to buy a home. We can finally get out of this apartment." Gary was thrilled. "Wow, that's incredible. I didn't expect that from them. So, when do we start house hunting?" Megan laughed at his eagerness. "Easy there. First, we need to pick a neighborhood that's close to work and has good schools for Jake. Let's talk to a realtor this weekend." Gary agreed, but as they discussed options, Megan hesitated to mention her parents' condition. She wasn't sure how he would react, especially since it involved something as personal as their future home. As Gary and Megan began their house hunt in earnest, their excitement grew. They toured properties on the weekends, talked late into the night about schools and neighborhoods, and sketched ideas for what they wanted in their new family home. Each home they visited seemed to bring them closer to their dream. Finally, they found it, a cozy 3-bedroom home with a small backyard, plenty of natural light, and close proximity to a good school for Jake. Megan felt as though everything was falling into place, and she couldn't wait to make an offer. Gary shared her excitement, thrilled that their son would grow up in a beautiful home surrounded by family. But there was a part of the arrangement that had been weighing heavily on Megan. Though she knew her parents' intentions were good, the condition that the house be in their name was something she hadn't fully revealed to Gary. She worried that he would feel excluded or that he might take offense, as the condition implied a lack of trust. One evening, just as they were about to make an offer on the house, Megan took a deep breath and broached the topic. "Gary, there's something I need to tell you about my parents' offer. They want to help us buy the house, but there's a condition." Gary raised an eyebrow, sensing her unease. "What kind of condition?" "They want the house to be in their names for now. Just for security reasons. They're worried about, just making sure the investment stays in the family." Gary's expression darkened as he absorbed the information. "In their names? So, it won't be our house?" "It will be," Megan assured him quickly, her voice calm but firm. "We'll be living there, and they have no interest in interfering. But the deed will technically be in their name. They're only doing this to help us get a home sooner." Gary looked away, his face tightening with a mix of frustration and disappointment. He'd envisioned this house as their family's, his and Megan's, where they could make decisions freely. To him, having it under her parents' name felt like a compromise of his independence and pride. It feels like I'm not being trusted here," he finally replied. I mean, I'm the one supporting our family now. I know, and I trust you completely, Megan responded, reaching for his hand. But they're offering a lot, and they're just being cautious. It's not about you, it's about them wanting to protect something they worked hard to save. Gary took a moment to process her words, his initial frustration softening as he considered the situation from Megan's perspective. Although he didn't like the arrangement, he understood the reasoning behind it. Reluctantly, he nodded. Fine. But this isn't what I expected. I just want you to know that. They reached an uneasy agreement, moving forward with the offer and starting the paperwork. While Megan felt relief, she could tell that Gary's pride was wounded. She hoped that, in time, he would see her parents' condition as a formality and nothing more. But deep down, Gary couldn't shake the feeling that he was being undermined. As they moved into the new house and began setting up their lives there, the unspoken tension from her parents' arrangement lingered, a small but growing distance between them. Despite the initial tension over the house arrangement, Gary and Megan moved into their new home with a sense of excitement. Megan poured herself into decorating, making the place warm and inviting. She hung curtains, painted walls, and added personal touches in every room. For her, this was the life she had dreamed of, a cozy home filled with love, a place where they could raise Jake and make memories. Gary, however, couldn't quite shake the uneasy feeling about the house being in her parents' names. Although he tried to push the thought aside, it lingered in the back of his mind, a quiet reminder that his ownership of the home felt incomplete. Still, he kept his reservations to himself, not wanting to dampen Megan's excitement or bring up old arguments. As Megan settled back into work part-time, their finances improved, allowing them to furnish the house and even plan a few family trips. With both of them working, the pressure on Gary eased, and he began to focus on long-term goals, including investing in a property of his own. He shared this idea with Megan one evening as they sat in their new backyard, watching Jake play with his toys in the fading sunlight. "I've been thinking," Gary said casually, "about getting a piece of land upstate. Somewhere quiet, maybe near the lake. I could build us a weekend place, a retreat from the city." Megan looked at him, surprised but intrigued. "That sounds ambitious. I didn't know you were interested in a project like that." Gary smiled, encouraged by her reaction. "Yeah, I think it'd be good for us. And it'd be ours, something we built together, away from the city noise." Megan admired his enthusiasm, but part of her felt wary. A new property was a big undertaking, especially since they had just settled into their current home. And, given her parents' investment in their primary house, she was concerned about the financial strain. "It sounds wonderful, Gary, but do you think it's the right time? We're still adjusting here, and I'm not sure if we're ready for such a big commitment." Gary's face fell slightly, but he masked his disappointment with a nod. "I get it. It's just an idea for now. Something to think about for the future." The conversation planted a seed in Gary's mind, fueling his ambition to build something he could truly call his own. Over the coming months, he casually looked into properties, sharing his excitement with Megan occasionally, though she remained hesitant. For her, the house they were living in was more than enough, and she wanted to focus on building a stable life there. But for Gary, the idea of owning a property outside of her parents' influence became increasingly appealing. As the months passed, Gary spent more time researching and planning, diving deeper into the logistics of buying land and building a second home. Megan sensed his growing preoccupation and tried to support his interest, even if she didn't fully understand it. She hoped that once they had a clearer financial footing, they could discuss it more seriously. However, as Gary became more invested in his plan, Megan couldn't help but feel a sense of distance between them. She worried that his fixation on a new property reflected something deeper, perhaps a feeling of insecurity or a desire for independence that their current home couldn't fulfill. Little did she know that Gary's dream would soon reveal challenges and intentions that neither of them could have foreseen. Gary's idea of building a second property took on a life of its own. What had started as a vague thought turned into an intense ambition, filling his spare hours with research, sketching designs, and poring over construction costs. He became increasingly focused on creating something independent, a place he could call his own without anyone else's influence. Meanwhile, Megan tried to be supportive, but her reservations grew as Gary's commitment deepened. She felt their family already had a good life in their current home, which they'd barely begun to settle into. Besides, the looming presence of her parents' involvement in the house was only an issue if Gary made it one. But his restlessness didn't subside. If anything, it seemed to fuel him. One evening, Gary sat Megan down to share his plan in full. "Megan, I found a piece of land near the lake. It's affordable and has everything we need to build a retreat, a place for family getaways. We can finally have a place that's really ours." Megan looked at him, concern flickering in her eyes. "Gary, I understand why this is important to you. But we're already managing a mortgage, and I worry that this will stretch us too thin. Are you sure it's worth the financial strain right now?" Gary's excitement dimmed, but his resolve remained strong. "It's an investment, Meg. I've even talked to my mom, and she's open to co-signing with me to help us secure a loan. I just need you to trust me on this." The mention of his mother joining the plan made Megan uneasy. She knew Gary had a close relationship with his mother, but the idea of bringing her into such a big financial decision added another layer of complication. Yet, seeing the determination in Gary's eyes, she didn't have the heart to outright refuse. Reluctantly, she agreed to his plan, hoping he understood the responsibility he was taking on. Gary took her consent as a green light, diving headfirst into the project. He spent weekends on the land, sometimes taking Jake along to show him the future. With his mother's support, he secured financing, and within months, construction began. Megan watched the project progress with a mix of pride and worry, unsure how to balance her encouragement with her growing concerns. As Gary became more absorbed in building the lake house, Megan noticed subtle shifts in their relationship. His focus was increasingly elsewhere, and he spent less time involved in their family's daily life. She felt as if the house near the lake had become a barrier between them, a symbol of Gary's need to create something outside their shared life. Conversations with her parents about Gary's project were difficult. They saw it as reckless and misguided, given the financial support they had already provided. One evening, Megan confronted Gary after he returned late from the construction site. "Gary, I'm proud of what you're building, but I feel like you're putting this house above everything else, even us. Jake and I hardly see you anymore, and I feel like we're becoming second to this dream of yours." Gary sighed, frustrated. "Megan, you knew this was important to me. I thought you understood that this is something I need to do, for myself and for our family. I'm doing this for us." Megan nodded, but a sense of unease remained. She had a nagging feeling that his motivations weren't entirely selfless, but she kept her concerns to herself, not wanting to add to the tension. Yet, deep down, she wondered if Gary's dream house was really about them, or if it was just for him. Unbeknownst to Megan, Gary's drive to complete the house would eventually lead them to a crossroads, where his ambitions and her trust in him would be tested like never before. For years into Gary's ambitious project, the lake house was still unfinished. What began as an exciting venture had slowly turned into a costly and time-consuming ordeal. Construction delays, rising material costs, and Gary's meticulous insistence on specific features had stretched both their finances and his patience to the limit. The once clear dream had become a series of half-completed walls, and as each year passed, the house seemed further from completion. Megan's initial support had long since waned. She watched the project eat away at Gary's time and their finances, with each delay putting more strain on their family's budget. She'd returned to full-time work to help cover their living expenses, but even with two incomes, they struggled to keep up with both their mortgage and the costs of the lake house. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Megan decided to bring up the mounting costs. "Gary, we need to talk about the lake house. It's been years, and it's still not finished. We're paying for two properties, and it's putting a lot of stress on us financially." Gary looked up, clearly irritated. "I know it's taking longer than we planned, but this is an investment, Megan. Once it's done, we could even rent it out. It'll pay for itself eventually." Eventually, Megan repeated, frustration seeping into her voice. But at what cost to us, Gary? This project is draining us. I feel like Jake and I hardly see you, and when you're here, you're always distracted, worrying about the house. This was supposed to be a family retreat, but it feels like it's taking you away from us. Gary's face hardened. Megan, this is something I've worked on for years. You knew how much this meant to me. It's not just a house, it's something I built. It's mine. Megan froze, the weight of his words hitting her. Mine. That single word revealed more than she'd realized. Despite her years of support, the sacrifices they'd both made, and the countless weekends she'd spent alone with Jake, Gary still saw the lake house as his personal achievement, separate from their shared life. The house, which she had once hoped would bring them closer, now felt like a wedge dividing their family. In the following months, Megan noticed more signs that Gary wasn't fully transparent about his plans. She'd ask for updates on the house's completion or paperwork, but he'd give vague responses, brushing her questions aside. Megan's concerns deepened when she learned that Gary hadn't yet registered the property in both of their names. Despite their joint financial investment, he'd kept it solely under his and his mother's names, citing unfinished business and technical delays. Megan's patience wore thin, and she voiced her frustration to her parents. They had helped her and Gary with the down payment for their main home, expecting their daughter's future to be secure. When they learned that the lake house wasn't registered as family property, they were alarmed. Her father suggested that she press Gary on the details, and her mother gently urged her to consider how much she'd been sacrificing for a project that seemed to be drifting further out of reach. Feeling the weight of their concerns, Megan knew she had to confront Gary directly. She needed to understand his true intentions, not only for the lake house, but for their family. She began to worry that Gary's fixation on his property was more than just a dream. It was a sign of something deeper, a desire for independence that clashed with their commitment as partners. As the gap between them widened, Megan prepared herself for a conversation that would either bring them closer together or push them apart completely. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Megan started looking more closely at the financial records for the lake house. She discovered that Gary had been making decisions and adjustments without consulting her, spending more than they had agreed upon. He had even taken out a second loan with his mother's help to cover additional expenses, keeping Megan completely in the dark about the financial burden this new loan imposed on their family. Her frustration reached a breaking point, and she decided to confide in her parents. During a quiet dinner at their home, Megan shared her worries about the lake house, the additional debt, and Gary's lack of transparency. Her parents listened intently, their faces growing more concerned with each detail Megan revealed. I've tried to be supportive, but it feels like the lake house is becoming his entire focus, Megan said, her voice trembling with frustration. It was supposed to be our project, something we could share as a family. But now, it's like he's building this place for himself. Megan's mother gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Honey, I think it's time you look at the bigger picture. This house isn't just a financial issue, it's about Gary's priorities. He's choosing this project over you and Jake. Her father nodded, his tone more direct. Megan, you've invested years and your own financial stability into supporting his dreams. But if he's not willing to share the responsibility or even keep you informed, then you need to think about your future. You've made sacrifices for him, but has he done the same for you? Megan took her parents' words to heart, realizing they echoed her own concerns. She returned home that night with a heavy heart, grappling with the realization that Gary's lake house was not the symbol of family unity she had once imagined. Instead, it seemed like a barrier between them, an extension of his personal ambitions that had little to do with their shared life. Deciding she couldn't let this continue unchecked, Megan approached Gary the following evening, her voice calm but firm. Gary, we need to talk seriously about the lake house and everything you've been doing without telling me. I found out about the second loan, and it's putting our family at risk. Gary's face hardened, a flash of defensiveness in his eyes. It's my project, Megan. I've put in the work, I've dealt with the setbacks, and I don't see why you're so concerned. This house will benefit us in the end. But it's not just your project, Gary, Megan replied, her voice rising. We agreed to build this together, yet you've kept me out of every major decision. The debt, the delays, the ownership, it's like you're building this house as if we don't exist. Gary looked away, unable to meet her gaze. After a tense silence, he finally spoke. I just wanted something that I could call my own. Everything else in our life feels shared, tied to everyone's expectations, especially with your parents and this house. Megan felt a pang of hurt, his words cutting deeper than she'd expected. Gary, we're a family. Things are supposed to be shared. But this isn't about the lake house anymore. It's about whether we're in this together or if you're just looking out for yourself. The gravity of her words hung between them, and for the first time, Megan saw the rift that had been growing between them in full clarity. She realized that Gary's drive for independence was more than just about the house, it was about his desire to break free from the commitment they had built together. The lake house had become a symbol of separation rather than unity, and Megan was no longer sure if their marriage could withstand it. This conversation marked a turning point. Megan knew she had to prepare for a future that might no longer include the dreams they had once shared. After their heated conversation, the atmosphere at home grew tense and strained. Megan felt trapped between her loyalty to Gary and her duty to protect their family's future. She couldn't ignore the financial risk he'd put them in, nor the emotional toll his actions had taken. She started to question if Gary truly valued their partnership or if his lake house had become his primary loyalty. Seeking clarity, Megan decided to test Gary's commitment to their family. With her parents' advice, she told Gary one evening that she had lost her job. She wanted to see if he would prioritize their immediate family over his dream project if they faced financial hardship. She dreaded lying, but she felt it was necessary to understand where his loyalty truly lay. Gary's reaction, however, was far from reassuring. Instead of showing concern or offering support, he seemed alarmed, even panicked. His mind instantly went to the lake house. But, if you're out of work, what does that mean for the lake house? He stammered, not even acknowledging the impact this supposed job loss would have on their everyday lives. Megan was stunned. She had hoped he would show some compassion, perhaps suggest they cut back on expenses or pause work on the lake house. But instead, Gary immediately started talking about how to keep his project afloat, considering new ways to finance it without her income. He seemed almost entirely focused on preserving his vision, even at the cost of their financial security. Gary, she interrupted, her voice low and filled with disappointment. This isn't just about the lake house. This is about our family. You're more concerned about keeping your project going than supporting me through a difficult time. He looked at her, seemingly taken aback by her words. But instead of acknowledging her point, he brushed her off. I'm doing this for us, Megan. Can't you see that this place is supposed to be our future? Megan shook her head, her patience worn thin. No, Gary. This isn't for us. It's for you. If it were for our family, you wouldn't be willing to risk everything we have for it. You'd be concerned about keeping us safe, not just keeping the house. Her words struck a nerve, and Gary turned away, unwilling to concede. You just don't understand, Megan. This house is my chance to prove myself. To finally have something I've built from scratch. Megan felt a mix of sadness and frustration. She realized that Gary's ambition had eclipsed his loyalty to her and their life together. He was willing to sacrifice their family's security for the sake of his own independence, a revelation that made her see their relationship in a different light. That night, Megan lay awake, grappling with the truth. Gary's reaction had confirmed her fears. His dream mattered more to him than the life they had built together. She knew that unless he could change his priorities, their marriage was at risk of crumbling entirely. The lake house had become not just a project, but a symbol of the growing divide between them, and Megan could no longer ignore it. Megan's doubts about Gary's commitment continued to grow in the weeks following their tense conversation. Her fabricated job loss had revealed more than she'd anticipated, showing her just how deeply his ambition for the lake house outweighed his loyalty to their family. She began to feel increasingly disconnected from him, recognizing that his obsession with the property might be masking something even more unsettling. One Saturday, while Gary was at the lake house, Megan decided to drive up unannounced. She told herself it was just to see the progress, but deep down, she needed to know more. She had a lingering sense that Gary was hiding something, and she hoped to either confirm or dismiss her fears. As she approached the house, Megan noticed a car she didn't recognize parked out front. Her heart pounded as she pulled up beside it, an unsettling suspicion taking root. She stepped out and walked around to the back of the house, where she could hear faint voices coming from inside. Through the half-open window, Megan saw Gary with a younger woman, who appeared to be admiring the half-finished interior. The woman laughed, leaning in close as Gary pointed out various features of the home, his tone relaxed and familiar. Megan's heart sank as she realized the intimacy of their interaction. She watched as Gary placed a hand on the woman's back, guiding her around with a warmth that he hadn't shown her in months. Feeling her chest tighten, Megan moved back, afraid they'd notice her. She stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what she'd seen. The lake house, which she'd once thought could be a place for their family, had become a space he was sharing with someone else. Megan's suspicions about Gary's priorities and intentions were no longer just doubts, they were a reality she could no longer ignore. She took a deep breath and returned to her car, her mind racing with anger and heartbreak. Gary's actions went beyond the financial recklessness she had feared. He had betrayed her trust in the most personal way possible. It was as if the lake house was a symbol not only of his obsession with independence, but of his detachment from the life they were supposed to be building together. Back home, Megan waited for Gary to return. When he finally walked through the door, she confronted him, her voice controlled but icy. "I went to the lake house today, Gary. I saw everything." Gary's face went pale, his confident facade crumbling as he realized he'd been caught. "Megan, it's not what it looks like," he stammered, trying to recover, but Megan held up her hand to silence him. "Don't," she said, her voice firm. "I've tried to support you, to understand your need for this project, even when it put a strain on our family. But you've crossed a line I can't ignore." She walked past him, her mind made up. The lake house wasn't a project for their future, it had become the final symbol of their unraveling marriage, and there was no going back. For Megan, the betrayal was complete, and she knew that she deserved better than to fight for someone who had chosen his own desires over the family they had built. In that moment, Megan resolved to protect herself and her son, even if it meant starting over without Gary. She was ready to face whatever came next, free from the illusion she had held onto for far too long. The betrayal Megan had discovered shattered the foundation of her marriage. She realized that her dreams of building a life with Gary had been just that, dreams. The reality was that his loyalty lay elsewhere, and she couldn't ignore the clear choice he had made. With her family's support, Megan decided it was time to take decisive action and reclaim her life. The next day, she contacted a lawyer to discuss her options. She explained the details of her situation, the lake house project, the finances Gary had mismanaged without her consent, and, most painfully, the infidelity she had witnessed. Her lawyer was compassionate but direct, informing her of her rights and advising her to protect her share of their assets, including their main home. With Megan's parents as partial owners, she felt reassured that she could secure the stability she and her son needed. Megan's first step was to confront Gary about the house and the finances. She asked him to meet her at a quiet cafe, away from the home they still shared. When he arrived, Megan could tell he was on edge, likely aware that this conversation would not go well. She took a steadying breath, then laid out her demands. "Gary, I want a separation," she said firmly, not leaving any room for ambiguity. "You've made your priorities clear, and they don't include me or Jake." Gary tried to downplay the situation, claiming that the lake house was just a project and that his relationship with the other woman was a misunderstanding. But Megan had heard enough excuses and was no longer interested in his attempts to justify his actions. "This isn't about one project or one mistake," she replied, her voice unwavering. "This is about you prioritizing your own desires over our family time and time again." I can't keep sacrificing myself and our future for someone who doesn't value us. Gary, visibly shaken, finally realized the gravity of the situation. He tried to convince Megan to give him another chance, but her resolve was stronger than his pleas. She had given him years of trust and countless sacrifices, only to be met with disregard and betrayal. For her, there was no going back. After their meeting, Megan set her plans in motion. She filed for divorce and took steps to secure her financial interests, particularly in their primary home. With her lawyer's guidance, she placed a hold on any further spending related to the lake house, effectively freezing the project Gary had invested so much in. She knew he would be furious, but her focus was now on protecting herself and Jake from any further instability. As the days went by, Gary's anger grew as he faced the consequences of his choices. He called, sent messages, and even tried showing up unannounced at her parents' home to plead his case. But Megan remained steadfast, refusing to let his attempts at reconciliation sway her. She had made her decision, and she was ready to move forward on her own terms. Throughout the divorce process, Megan leaned on her family and close friends for support. They reminded her of her strength and helped her see that she was doing the right thing for herself and her son. Slowly, the sadness and betrayal she'd felt gave way to a sense of empowerment. She was taking control of her life, building a future where she and Jake could thrive without the weight of Gary's deceit and selfish ambitions. With each step, Megan felt herself reclaiming her independence and her peace. Though the journey was painful, she knew she was finally free to build a life on her own terms, a life that would be rooted in genuine love, respect, and stability. As the divorce finalized, Megan felt a bittersweet sense of relief. The life she had once envisioned with Gary was now officially behind her. She was stepping into a new chapter, one that would be grounded in her own strength and the knowledge that she could create a future for herself and Jake without relying on anyone who didn't truly have their best interests at heart. With the legal proceedings concluded, Megan took steps to rebuild her life. She focused on creating a nurturing home for Jake, filling their house with warmth, laughter, and new memories. For the first time in years, she felt free to make decisions that truly reflected her values, her goals, and her sense of stability. Megan also began rediscovering parts of herself that she had set aside during her marriage. She joined a community art class and began painting again, an old hobby she had nearly forgotten. Through art, she found a way to express the complex emotions she had experienced, from the pain of betrayal to the triumph of regaining her independence. Each brushstroke reminded her of the resilience she had developed, layer by layer, over the past few months. As she immersed herself in this new life, Megan's confidence blossomed. Her colleagues at work noticed her renewed focus, and soon she was offered a promotion, a leadership position that came with both financial stability and the satisfaction of seeing her hard work recognized. She accepted it with pride, knowing that she had achieved it on her own terms. One weekend, Megan decided to take Jake on a trip to a nearby lake, the same lake where Gary had once planned his unfinished retreat. She wanted to show her son that the lake, now free from the weight of Gary's ambitions, could simply be a place of peace and beauty. As they skipped stones across the water, she felt a sense of closure. Jake, still young but perceptive, looked up at her and asked, "Mom, are we happy now?" She smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Yes, Jake, we are. We're building a good life together, and that's all we need." In the months that followed, Megan continued to rebuild her life with intention and purpose. She formed new friendships, surrounded herself with supportive people, and even joined a hiking group, exploring places she had once dreamed of visiting. Each new experience filled her with a sense of freedom and possibility she hadn't felt in years. Reflecting on her journey, Megan recognized that, though the path had been difficult, it had led her to a place of self-respect and empowerment. She was no longer defined by someone else's dreams or limited by their choices. Instead, she had reclaimed her independence and, along with it, a future full of promise. Through her strength, resilience, and unbreakable spirit, Megan had built a life rooted in love and authenticity, a life where she and Jake could thrive. And as she looked toward the future, she knew that whatever challenges might come, she was prepared to face them, stronger and wiser than ever.